Right, Mr. Chair, we're recording.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start reading. All right, welcome to the May 20th, 2025 Zoning Ordinance Committee meeting. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting which may vote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. Members of ZOCO are participating both here in person and virtually through electronic means. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the ZOCO webpage, the county's event calendar, and the email notification sent to ZOCO email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed and keep your microphone muted as you enter the meeting during the meeting. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat will only be used to provide instructions for virtual attendees on how to register for public comment and to field general questions about Microsoft Teams. Teams chat will not otherwise be monitored by staff of the Planning Commission during the meeting, nor will it be used to collect feedback. Unlike Planning Commission's regular meetings, the ZOCO agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, time for public comment is provided at ZOCO chair's discretion. Public comments associated with agenda items can be provided by people attending in person and virtually. For in-person attendees, indicate on the meeting sign-in sheet that you'd like to provide comment. Virtual attendees, please indicate in the Teams chat you'd like to provide public comment, and your name will be added to the list of speakers. As a reminder, you can always provide written comments via the link that is provided in the Teams chat on ZOCO's website. All written comments will be shared with the Planning Commission and posted to the ZOCO page for public viewing. All comments received as of noon today have already been shared with ZOCO. I will call for speakers at the start of the meeting, and I will ask Mr. Rogers if we have virtual attendees who would like to provide comment. Mr. Rogers will acknowledge speakers in the Teams chat. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by person. When virtual attendees are called upon, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located in your meeting command bar. Moderator does not have the ability to unmute. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. And that we can get ready to go into the staff presentation.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order as for our meeting tonight, this is our first ZOCO meeting. And I know historically ZOCO has set aside time at the end of the meeting for public comment.
Yeah.
But as for our first meeting of 2025, you had suggested that we perhaps for public comment on items that are on the agenda, you perhaps suggested that that public comment meeting brought to the front of the agenda. And so just if you had some comments to talk about some of your thinking on that and amongst your colleagues.
Yeah, so Nick and I, we kind of spoke during we were planning out how we were going to tackle these meetings. We had kind of discussed the idea of putting public comment after the presentation, similar to what we do for general body meetings. So that way, the idea is that if people want to stay and make their voices heard through the public comment process, they can stay for the presentations, part of it, make their comments and leave if they want to return to their normal day-to-day lives outside of this and not spend 2-3 hours with us all night. So we're going to try this out with ZOCO. We're going to have comments after the presentation if there are any people who show up between now and then. And we'll have it there, and then we'll have it going forward, assuming there aren't any disruptions, and then we can just see how that goes. Experiment. But yeah, so other than that, I feel we can get ready to rock and roll and start with the presentations.
That sounds good. Give me one moment. I don't see we have any members of the public other than staff or Planning Commission in attendance. I do see one virtual attendee, and so and I mentioned in the chat if Ben would like to provide public comment, they're happy to indicate so in the chat. But otherwise, yeah, I'll look for that message and then I'll turn things over to you, Mr. Chair.
Sounds great. Okay. Yeah, I think we can get on with staff presentation whenever y'all are ready. For the first item being the signs issue.
Thank you all very much for having me this evening. Rachel Hunger, Assistant Director of Planning Housing Development. I'm joined this evening with Debbie Albert, who is our Deputy Zoning Administrator, also in CPHD. Again, bringing forward to you some strategic amendments to the sign regulations. Really, this is stemming from a lot of work associated with the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, CMRI 2.0, looking to modernize Arlington's regulations, practices, and processes to best respond to economic shifts. Really 5 guiding principles, looking at improving redevelopment processes, streamlining processes for building repositioning, creating a new process for adaptive reuse and conversions, addressing regulatory relief tools for capturing tenant demand, and finally, enhanced policing effort. So I think what we're speaking of tonight really fits into a couple of these things, but really focusing on how do we police tenants. Just giving you a quick update on the CMRI. Many of you have been involved in this trajectory to date, going from use tables to parking, the policy on the transformation of office buildings, and now we're sort of in this next tranche looking at signs. So, without further ado, really wanted to set the table for you about signs in Arlington. In July 2012, there was a significant amendment to, it's now referred to as Article 13 signs. It was an improved comprehension of the ordinance. It enhanced the ease for administration and compliance, and incorporated best practices and Arlington specific practices. And I think most importantly is to understand that it reduced the frequency for which sign approval is required. At that particular time, 30 to 40% of all sign applications required approval by the county board through a special exception. So this was an important piece of changing it and creating actually flexibility within our signs and more predictability within our sign regulations. Since that time, there have been a handful of amendments, including an amendment to remove content-based regulations, the large media screens, which recently changed to the visual outdoor entertainment, looking at signs in the 50 feet within Roslyn's Central Place, signs in Arlington's regional shopping centers, expanding the allocation of sign area to plazas and second-story retail, and then adding additional flexibility for properties that were subject to the older comprehensive sign. So before you tonight, a quick summary of what we're doing is there are strategic amendments to the selected sign regulations, primarily in Arlington's commercial districts. We're really looking at consideration of the impacts and benefits to the broader public and to the county's economic well-being. We want to ensure that we have some of the considerations, additional flexibility and additional clarity and organization within the ordinance. And finally, that we feel that these potential amendments would be a So a real quick overview in what we're looking at. Further, in additional slides will go into more depth. Really looking at signs above 4 feet. Some signs that are located below the second story, but still might be above 40 feet. Allowing for certain freestanding signs, and then these broader regulations for temporary construction, sales / leasing activities to account for construction. Dive into these a little bit more in depth. You're really focusing on signs placed above a height of 40 feet. Overall is to reorganize and move all of the different relevant regulations to this particular section instead of having it in a couple of different locations. One for clarity, and then what we're doing in the following policy changes. allowing these types of signs that are above 40 feet on buildings that are less than 70 feet in height. This would also include signs for buildings in our PS districts. That's found on lines 132, 133, lines 245, 248. I won't read the lines anymore, just so you're trying to highlight those for you. Calculating the sign area based on the width of the base of the building rather than the width of the building at the height of the sign. So for example, this building right here, this is 1201 Atlas Boulevard. So if a sign was placed under the current regulations is placed up in this area, the sculpted area, the measurement was the width of where this building is. So sculpted buildings have less of a sign area, and we're making it so it's at the ground of the building for the measurement. And finally, we're removing the sign band and placement restriction. Previously, in our current ordinance, signs have to range between a height of 6 feet, can go up to 9 feet to accommodate logos, and have to be placed within 20 feet of the changes. One other element about signs physical of a height, it's allowing buildings with multiple towers to have up to 2 signs on each tower, up to 2 towers. So it's really looking at, we have the Roslyn Twin Towers. They are joined, treating them as 2 distinct towers. And this is just a massing study of the city sector plan of understanding there may be a podium of 5 stories or so and towers. And just allow having clarity in the zoning ordinance to ensure that these towers each can have. This is a change, and it's really allowing for signs on approved landscape planters, retaining, screening, or structural walls for site plan or form-based code buildings. By definition, these signs would be freestanding signs, which are currently prohibited for most uses in our commercial mixed-use strips. So recognizing we do have some sites that just accommodate the construction of it. You'll be seeing retaining walls. Oftentimes we see this in Roslyn. This is extending the ability to have a sign on that wall in certain areas. And again, the landscape planners retaining, screening, walls. Another item that we've heard about is expanding our temporary signs for construction, sale, leasing activities to accommodate street construction. Making certain that if there is construction that may be impeding access into or some tenants that are open for business, to ensure that they can have sort of an open for business sign during that construction. Another big item around these temporary signs, which are important, is eliminating the permit requirement. They sound small, but these are big moves for our business community. There are a couple of other considerations that we're looking at for some signs below 40 feet. Accommodating arcade signs for up to 20 square feet on all C and district buildings rather than some of our strip shopping centers. Also allowing the bladed wall signs that are placed below 40 feet or below the second story above the finished grade, whichever is higher, and not triggering that you're counting it against the sign above 40 feet. Looking at our public, civic, and institutional buildings and accommodating commercial signs and increasing the number of signs from 2 to 3. So for an example, a church that may have a preschool in that church building, they can have the sign for the church, but it allows them to also have a sign for that preschool. And then finally, with the comprehensive sign plans, really trying to combine all of the different elements and information required for comprehensive sign plans into one section and providing clarity. Yeah, many of the buildings in Arlington are in a comprehensive sign plan, and this is trying to make it easier for tenants to understand what that means and how they may address Finally, I wanted to highlight, these are strategic and elements that we aren't touching, and it's sections 13.1 through 13.6, and then 13.12, 13.14, 13.17, 13.18, 13.19. I did add 13.2. And the reason being is upon further discussion about the site plan condition related to architectural illumination, we did have some language in the memo, but we have concluded that amendment is not necessary, and therefore we won't be changing section 13.2. That I want to go into quickly with the schedule. The county board had an initiating resolution of intent for your joint meeting this evening. Plan for an RTA in June, commission meetings in June and July, and the county board action in July. And a little bit more detailed, we've had some initial conversations with the chamber, and also see very high level about CMRI generally, attending this meeting tonight, and then some additional engagement opportunities. That concludes my presentation and available for questions.
Thank you. So I guess now it's with the Zoco here.
That's it.
Questions, comments?
The width, that's the including setbacks, because you have at the ground. Some buildings are wide, but they're also goes along, then it goes back and then it goes over. So it's the entire width, including that part that's set back.
It's actually just a straight line from one side to the other.
So, but then if it then goes back and over, you don't include that other.
Right, so if it kind of goes, in and out, like there's an inset, it's actually a defined term. We call it linear foot of building frontage in the ordinance, and it is defined as one corner of the building to the other corner of the building without counting any insets.
Okay, not the width of the building on the side.
That's U-shaped.
Oh, if it's U-shaped, it would just go straight across. So it's
So
basically
it's
like
set.
one corner to the other corner with a line that's most parallel to the public right of way in front of it. So yeah, if it's a U-shaped building, it would just be from here to there.
Okay.
It wouldn't be this
Or
distance.
L-shaped.
Or
It wouldn't
L-shaped.
be just a little corner here and the little corner here. It would be including the, that's
Yes,
what I'm trying to get at.
yes. And the assumption is there's, retail all along that inside. It would-
Yeah. It's the same, or same if there's the center part that's here and then it steps back here. So it'd be from here to here rather than from. That's what I want to
That's correct.
understand. Okay, good.
Just doesn't measure sort of that sawtooth.
Right. No, I get that. I just want the straight across, not the, yeah. So that's good. Towers. There's one where you're saying up to 2 towers can have 2, but we have some that could be 3 towers or more, especially where we have the super blocks, like in Crystal City, where everything's on a podium there. And sometimes it's one big development. Sometimes that one podium is multiple owners. You could have a situation where the podium on this super block has 3 towers, 4 towers with one owner, and the next block over has 4 towers, but each is owned by a separate person, a separate entity. So they're treated differently. So the one where there's 4 on one super block, they would all get 2 each. Whereas the 4 of them on the next block over, the 4 together are limited to 4. That doesn't seem to make sense.
But I think we're also defining how we looking at towers. Particularly the Crystal City sector plans, a building with distinct towers for all floors above the 5th floor.
Okay,
So for many of them, there might be sites that one story and then go above. But this is also to include those that
so again, how high it's above the 5th?
above the 5th floor.
Okay, that works for Crystal City.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Okay, got it.
When we're talking about signs, are we talking just about like the building sign, like Amazon or a childcare facility? Or if somebody wanted to put up like a Coca-Cola sign, like you said, like Times Square does, and these are advertisements that somebody could rent out that space. Are both of those uses possible?
So our sign ordinance does not allow for off-premise advertising.
Okay,
So no to.
right. And can anybody put a sign up? I'm just thinking, like, if an apartment building wanted to put up a giant sign that then blocked the window and access to sunlight for all of the residents, could they do that? Is there a requirement like, okay, you can do that, but only for a certain amount of time? Or they could put up a sign that blocks 20% of residents' windows and that would be okay.
We don't regulate, so they
Okay.
could do it.
Okay, they
It
could,
probably wouldn't be wise for them.
okay,
No, actually, they
Um,
quit.
sorry.
The Navy League, was it in Clarendon? That one big office building at Highland and Washington Boulevard. I forget what the major tenant is. It's one of the think tanks. Every Memorial Day, July 4th, they hang a gigantic flag down the side, right in front of all the windows. And, no one's going to complain about that. And I'm certainly not going to, but that does happen.
Yeah, so it is kind of. Unless there is a site plan condition that limits it. Or a transparency or some other.
and why, what was the rationale for not having the stricter sign regulations before?
I would say they were not stricter. You mean stricter than when
Oh,
we're
okay, so
making
we're
them
not
now?
loosening
So
them
the
up for
20 no,
CMRI.
we are loosening them up.
Okay, yeah, so why
So the
were they tighter?
rationale- So in 2012.
Yeah.
We didn't look at it as strict. We looked at it as, in fact, loosening it up substantially. So
was.
in 2012, we wanted anything other than a wall sign or a blade sign bigger than 6 square feet. We needed county board approval. In 2012, we opened it up to allow all the sign types that we allow now to just, also in 2012 and in the years prior, sign area, I know like back in 2007, was limited to 60 square feet per tenant. It went up to 100 and then it went up to 120. So it just kind of kept on getting broader. But one of the things we did in 2012 is just kind of give you your aggregate sign area for the building and let you, the building manager, divide it up any way you want. Want to give it all to one tenant, do that. So I think in 2012, it was actually a substantial broadening of the sign regulations. And it was based on, the way it was broadened at the time was based on the consistent practice that the board had in approving the types of signs that were not at the time in the ordinance.
It was really contentious. A lot of people were thinking, oh my God, it's gonna look like New York. It's gonna look like you're gonna have, every store is gonna be plastered with signs. And there was a lot of
So
concern.
people were concerned about the artistic look of it and over marketing and too much advertising.
Yep.
Okay, and then we have seen that that's not a problem, so we can loosen things up even a little bit more.
Yeah, and I would say at the time, there was probably less concern about signs at the tail level than there were about signs at the roof level.
There's always been concern in neighborhoods about signs that can be seen in the neighborhood, up at the top of the building. For whatever reason, that seemed to bother people.
But now we don't have that concern because now they will be able to have bigger signs.
But can they face the neighborhood?
We are not changing the map.
So there's a map in the sign ordinance, call it the blue line and the pink line. So there's a blue line that kind of articulates on the map where you're facing a neighborhood, and there are rules for what you're allowed to do when facing a neighborhood. And then the pink line faces federal lands. When you're facing federal property, national parks, et cetera, you're limited to just the one sign. You don't get the two. In that direction, you can have one on another side of the building. But yeah, they're not allowed to face the blue line,
Yeah,
which is
that was the
facing
battle.
residential.
National, was it what was that group? The regional group, the federal group that,
National Council Planning Commission.
yeah, really was not happy with Arlington.
And are there regulations on what can be on the signs, like sexy people dancing between these hours? Is there any, is that part of this ordinance?
Cannot regulate content.
Okay.
Yep.
So if we are allowing commercial speech, it is commercial speech. Provided it's not off premise advertising.
And anywhere you allow commercial speech, you have to allow non-commercial speech. So you can limit a sign to non-commercial only, but you can't limit it to just commercial.
And they're doing anything with the mural issue? Where when people, because we've had situations like Clarendon, the one little place, pizza place, they had a mural that they painted on the side of their building, and they had to paint it over because it had pictures of tomatoes, bananas and stuff, because that was food. And since they serve food, they couldn't do that. If they had a bicycle, they could have kept it. But because they were a food establishment, they had to paint it over. Whereas if it was a bicycle store across the street, they could have painted the tomatoes on it, it would have been fine. They just couldn't put a bicycle.
Good cohesive advertising.
Yeah, I know.
Opposite.
But it was,
Yeah.
but
An arrow.
I would say that's not in there. They're allowed to have a sign with tomato. It just has to be limited to the sign.
well, this is the
area.
entire side of the little.
Right. So it needs to be limited to the sign area that they are.
That's why I say when it's mural,
But
because
if it is advertising the product that is sold in the building, it is considered a sign.
I thought that one, thought it was a bit of a stretch for the zoning administrator because it wasn't pictured, it's a pizza place. That's what they sold. And it was veggies on the side. Maybe because there's tomato sauce in a pizza, you couldn't do it, but it was a really very nice, probably fairly expensive. It was a mural because it covered yeah, it was Clarendon. It was one of those little hamburger places that have been redone. Yeah, and they had to paint it over.
Isn't that blue one?
It's been a couple of those. It's happened in the county where they've had to go and paint over.
Yeah.
Well, I really like that temporary signs will be allowed during construction. I think that's really important. I was just reading that
Maybe
Lost
they
Dog
did.
Cafe might close or like move their Columbia Pike location just because, the construction has been so long. So anything that we can help.
What I would like on that though, if you could expand it even a little more, unless this is already allowed, when they put the fences up. And so one example, we're open during construction. Where there had been retail there, if the sign said, we have moved the new address, it's no longer a use. It was a use. They've moved, but it would help that somebody who hadn't seen it could go and go, oh my gosh, they're down 3 blocks down, because that's happened. And that's happening right now.
It would even be nice if it's an SPRC, if it's part of this SP, like it's like mission that space. And then there's like a streamlined paperwork, like you don't have to, I don't know how much bureaucracy there is to apply for a sign permit, but make it easy for them. If it's
That would
related to an
really help
SPRC.
small businesses.
So we have proposing to remove the permit requirement altogether. For
Okay.
construction, sale, and see, right now they do need a permit. But so take away all the perfect.
But anyway.
As long as they're meeting.
Right, what used to be there that they moved, allow it to say they moved and where.
For a set amount of days after they've.
Yeah, well, the construction, it's on the construction. fence.
Right.
Well, the construction fence is there.
Right.
Once it's gone, fine, it's gone, but during construction, leave it there. I also like that you expanded it for the public use, because basically that means churches, because we have churches that have 2 congregations. And each of them would want to have a sign. They're like totally different.
Yeah, I have a question real quick. Could you explain the multiplier that's being used
For
for the sign area?
Sure, so this isn't a big change. From what was previously there. I think it was 70 feet to 100 feet of the building. It takes 0.6 of the linear frontage that
Mhm.
defined. From the 100 to the 200 feet is the 1.0, so you just multiply it by 1. And then for buildings that are taller, 200 feet, you're multiplying it by 1.5. What we did, because we're adding a new category, so we're allowing for buildings under 70 feet,
Mhm.
just capping that
Sure.
actually, with no multiplier, the sort of, it's a 75 feet.
And so by multiplying it, you're multiplying the size of the sign effectively by.
If the width of the building is 100 feet wide,
Sure.
your sign up to 100.
Okay,
So it's a, linear footage to square footage.
got it. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, and then, yeah, and then that's it. Previously, it was, this is the total square footage, and you have to fit it into this.
Yeah. Okay.
So this has the potential to, for some buildings, significantly increase the size of the sign. that you
Yeah.
put Above 40.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially as the building gets bigger, you have that larger multiplier. And that makes sense. You're building more area to convey the message. You know, people have to squint trying to set signs there. But
Yeah, for those, are we having same rules for dynamic signs?
As a changeable copy. Yes, a changeable copy is not allowed
Okay.
for signs above 40 feet.
What about that, down in Roslyn, there's a large building with like all windows, and right behind the windows, there's like a massive.
That's allowed.
And yeah, but that's just art. It's not advertising, or
It doesn't matter. It's inside.
it's inside, but you can see it through the
It's
windows.
inside.
So the sign ordinance does define what is a window sign. And I believe it's if you're within 2 feet of the window,
These
you're
are
defined to
like-
be a window sign. No, but I know this is the one you're talking about in Wilson.
But it's also right downstairs here, the dentist's office has a huge screen
Yes.
behind their reception desk, which you see right
Yeah,
through.
but that is not counted as a sign.
Exactly. That's why I looked, went, oh, very clever.
The one they have in the window
That's different.
counts as a sign.
Yeah.
It's in the window. But yes, the one in Roslyn is just colors and
Oh,
pictures.
it's more than that sometimes.
Yeah.
Because now that it's owned by, that new entity that, does online,
Star.
they're using it for advertising now for themselves. Because actually I was sitting in that lobby the other day, and it was like each of their entities is getting a turn on the big screen as to, what they are. But they're way far back. They're up against
Yeah.
on the reception desk.
it's a good screen to quality images up there. And so with Jim, if I was catching what you just asked, like, so these signs, they're not ones that can kind of filter through different, like it's just the one image, that multiple ones, or digital or anything like that, or. I guess if anything that's on premise is these signs, so they could cycle between different, like what you're saying. Yeah,
Will like roll through a new.
through multiple ads on the same sign.
So for signs above 40, there's no change.
Okay, so that's what that means. Okay. You said that, I wasn't sure what you meant. Sorry. Gotcha. Okay. You get one image you can put up there, and that's what you get. Okay. And this applies only to areas in special planning districts, commercial and residential buildings. Outside of that,
So signs
What
above
about
40 feet, there's specific zoning districts for which they
Okay.
are permitted. And so it's permitted in everything except S3A, SD, RAs, so our residential districts. C1, C2, C10, C410, C1R. So those are our lower scale commercial districts. It's really focusing on more commercial mixed use districts. that we
Additionally, they are limited to buildings that are at least 50% commercial or hotel or public use. So if you are a residential building, you're not eligible for that additional.
okay.
So, but like high-rise apartment building
Correct.
couldn't take, so they
Correct.
couldn't block the window for, except for the smaller previous
Correct.
size.
Correct.
Okay.
Some of them have legally non-conforming signs that were approved by the board before 2012. They get to keep those signs, but a new residential building is not eligible.
Do we envision these are generally like kind of permanent-ish signs? Or is it like I could put up a canvas on my building that's, you know, meets the right size, and then a month later I switch it out with a new canvas, and then a month later I switch it out with a new canvas?
So a canvas is just defined as a banner sign, which is not a sign type that would be allowed at that height.
Okay, so the flag.
Unless it's a temporary sale, actually. Even then, it's not. No, even then, it's not allowed above 40 feet. So yeah, it's just a wall or a plate sign then that can be above 40. So if you're on fabric material, that's defined as a banner.
Yeah, the flag may be a banner, but it's, I would not want to touch that.
Yeah, no. And I was wondering, when you came up with these new guidelines, are these like best practices that are being recommended these days? Is it, you know, comparable cities? We often compare ourselves to Cambridge. Is it through consultation with the Chamber of Commerce or NAIOP, or is this just kind of common sense stuff that you feel like?
Are you going to go to CivFed?
I think it's the potpourri, in that, they, from economic development, they've been hearing some concerns, that have been raised. They've brought forward from the chamber. We're not addressing everything, but we are addressing some things. And I think just sort of, Worship Debbie was the author of sort of in 2012, and she sort of sits in that role and is seeing there are things that can be changed that actually just makes it easy. So I would say it's all of the above that we're seeing. Just sort of living the ordinance now.
We have a general idea of like, this new change is going to allow the average business in Arlington to get a sign that's 30% bigger than what they, or I know there's no like average business, but.
Right, so, I mean, the changes are that one change is associated with the signs that are above 40 feet. So it's going to be limited to the team who's going to be looking for those signs. And it's going to be unique to the building. So there might be some buildings that there is no change, but for some other buildings that have the sculpting that occurs, there will be a change. So in some ways, almost all buildings are treated equally from a perspective of the tenant looking at the sign size. But I think we haven't really made changes to sign size, but allowing like up to 20 square feet for arcade signs on all C&M districts except retail strips. That's a difference in size.
Right, and that's just that individual sign, right? So at the retail level and small business wise, you're not going to see a change in the total sign area allowed, just a little bit more flexibility in the types of signs they can have.
Also, one more question. So you said it's probably going to come to planning commission in June or July?
To planning commission,
July, okay.
there's a
It's not currently on the forecast that I talked to
okay.
them about the other day, so, and we already have 3 hearings that month, so. Get on the list.
We'll fit it in the queue. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll just do every night. All right.
I know we made mention of it, but I'll double check.
Okay, any more comments, questions, concerns? Hearing none, I think that's it. So thank you very much. Yes, we do.
Oh, I was getting ready to leave.
This is right up. We're not done.
Guys, later.
I'm going yet.
So for agenda item number 2, we have Columbia Pike Neighborhoods Form-Based Code, Phase Development Use Permit. Good night. Thank you. Take care.
Do have you all on the agenda for July.
Good.
Oh, good, good.
Good.
Those are some bigger items, so. We'll need some more. What else?
Yes, I'm freezing.
It's like less.
Still smells like paint.
A little traffic there. Clerk's chair. Where you were sitting.
All right, well, Olivia Sontag with the Arlington County Planning Division, we've got Tuesday here as well. I'll give the presentation and then we're both available for questions. So tonight, this discussion is going to focus on amendments to the Neighborhoods Form-Based Code or Phase Development Use Permit tool. This is specifically going to focus on tracking for the Barcroft Apartments property. So while we're going to focus on the Neighborhoods Form-Based Code amendments for the Space Development Use Permit tool, we did want to highlight there are 2 other items that are going to track along with this. We anticipate they will be considered by the board in July. So those other 2 items are the actual Phase Development Use Permit application, and then a new market rate construction use permit application. So that use permit application was first submitted in February. We'll be taking that to the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group tomorrow. And again, that'll track for July. Both the proposed amendments to the Form-Based Code and the Phase Development Use Permit application. The amendments were heard by the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group last month. They're here at ZOCO tonight, and those will continue with the RTA in June and again, hearing in July. So again, before we get to those form-based code changes, I think those are only 2 slides, pretty straightforward material there. We felt it was important to provide, again, a little bit of background on the Master Financing Development Plan and kind of the framework that's anticipated for this space development use permit for Barcroft. So just to get us started, everyone's pretty familiar by now, but this is the 60-acre Barcroft Apartments property. There's about 50 existing buildings on the site. It's on the western half of Columbia Pike at the northern end there, and then bounded by South George Mason Drive, South 4 Mile Run. Currently contains a total of 1,335 housing units on the site, and those are being proposed to be preserved as CAFs. So the Master Financing and Development Plan was approved by the County Board in July of 2024. This plan included 3 different components. The first was the Affordable Housing Financing Plan, then the redevelopment plan, and a phasing plan. This MFDP made a number of different commitments. Some of those commitments have now been implemented into the Neighborhoods Form-Based Code via some amendments that the board adopted in February of this year. So those include some of the revisions to the conservation area limits and redevelopment areas, some of the multimodal network and parking, public open spaces, and some of our natural preserve areas. But there are some other commitments like tree canopy and the phasing plan, which are not codified in the Neighborhoods Form-Based Code, and those will be monitored separately. So this brings us back to the long-term vision for Barcroft. The commitment to preserving those 1,335 CAFs remains, where some of those units are going to be preserved in existing buildings that'll be renovated, and then some will be delivered in new construction. So the remaining portions of the property in the northeast and northwest corners are going to see market rate development. So moving on to some of the near-term efforts, in order to get some of these existing buildings renovated for existing residents, there are a number of renovation use permits that have been considered and approved by Planning Commission and County Board over the past couple of years. So we currently have 4 renovation use permits that have been approved. We currently have 2 renovation use permits under review. Those are anticipated to go to the Planning Commission and County Board in June. And then our final and 7th renovation use permit will be considered sometime this fall. We've also started reviewing some redevelopment use permit applications, one of which was approved earlier this year. It's a 100% affordable project with 110 CAFs. And then as I mentioned earlier, we do have our first market rate construction proposal, which is anticipated to go to the county board in July. And that currently is proposing about 260 units. So we anticipate that approximately 960 of the 1,335 CAFs are going to be preserved in renovated units, and then the remaining 375 or so are going to be provided in new construction. So long-term, these are the remaining sites that are eligible for redevelopment. We anticipate a total of about 20 different use permits. Again, 7 of those are the renovation use permits. The remaining 12 or 13 are going to be new construction. So while the renovations are anticipated to be completed in the next couple of years, we do know that the timing and sequencing of the new construction is going to be dependent on the timing of resident relocations, some of the tax credits that the applicant's relying upon, and the market conditions. So this is all to say that this is going to be a long-term plan. There are going to be many different use permits and elements to track as the renovations and redevelopment are completed. So that brings us to the kind of phase development use permit application. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the components of this application so that you can better understand some of the amendments that we're proposing. So to help monitor all of these commitments across these 20 different use permits that we anticipate, this new tool is going to monitor a number of different items. The first of which is going to be tree canopy targets. These are outlined in the Master Financing Development Plan. There are different tree canopy targets specified for different areas within Barcroft. The second item is accessible units, and these requirements are outlined both in the building code as a minimum, but also some additional commitments that have been made in the MFDP. We also have overall parking, which again, some above and beyond commitments in the MFDP, but also some baseline requirements in the neighborhood's form-based code. Affordable housing, again, which they've made some commitments above and beyond. And then the biophilic pedestrian pathways, which run throughout the site, and will be relying upon a phasing plan in order to be realized. So this phasing plan, which we'll expand upon in just a little bit, it's not going to focus on sequencing or timing, but just helps connect which portions of the site will deliver different improvements across 6-acre property. So before we dive into the specific components, these are just to highlight how the PDUP is proposed to be different from, I think, what we would typically anticipate a PDSP would deliver. So the PDUP is going to include condition language, data tables, and maps. to help to track all of these individual items. It would also include that phasing plan, but again, it's just associating site improvements with specific areas of redevelopment. And then it'll also include some design guidelines specifically for the biophilic pedestrian pathways. But what it won't include are maximum density and use allocations. These are already described in the neighborhoods form-based code, and the code doesn't limit density. So that's one of the significant differences. It's also, again, not going to include a traditional phasing plan with specific sequencing of which development pad needs to come first. And then it also won't have any building design guidelines because the form-based code is very specific about these design guidelines and architectural standards already. So the next few slides are going to provide a little more detail on the commitments in each of those 5 categories that I mentioned. So this first one identifies the different tree canopy targets across the site. They differ between the new development, mini parks, historic preservation areas, and the national preserve areas. So across the site, this mechanism will allow the site to collectively meet all of these requirements. In some cases, we're going to see surplus in certain areas, and other areas will be able to borrow that surplus. So we're already tracking some of this in some of the use permit applications and getting to see how it plays out across the site. The second item are accessible units. The building code does require a minimum of 2% of the site to be provided as accessible units. So with the renovations, the applicant has been converting existing units to accessible units. They are nearly at that 2%, but anywhere that they fall short, they are proposing to create new accessible units in some of the 100% affordable redevelopment projects. And you can see on this table off to the side with all of the renovation use permits that have been reviewed so far, we have about 2.9% across those that have been reviewed. So in addition, one of the ways that they are helping to supplement that 2% requirement, the applicant had agreed to, in all of the 100% affordable new construction projects, they're providing 10% of the units as accessible units. So we saw that delivered in the first 100% affordable new construction project that was approved by the board earlier this year. And there we anticipate 2 remaining 100% affordable buildings that will also deliver that same commitment. So further surplusing this 2% minimum requirement. But again, something we need to track across all of these use permits. So the third is overall parking. As part of this site review, we did inventory the existing parking supply for the property, and the Jar Lynch team is committed to maintaining approximately the 1 space per unit that exists on site today in the renovation areas. And then we do have existing requirements in the neighborhoods form-based code for other areas, like some of the CAF new construction, like the project approved earlier this year. It has to comply with that 0.825 spaces per unit requirement in the code. And then market rate new construction will be at the 1.125 spaces per unit, and retail at 1 space per 1,000 square feet. So again, the site will kind of collectively deliver some of these requirements. These ones are a little bit more straightforward, divided between all of the different types of development that we're seeing on site. But you need people help to track all of these across the site to make sure that parking supply is maintained. So the fourth item is affordable housing, and it's one of the main reasons, or the main changes that we're proposing in the text of the neighborhoods form-based code. So the applicant is still committing to providing those 1,335 units as CAVs for 99 years, averaging 60% AMI. Again, those are provided within the renovated areas. about 960 units renovated, and then 3 new construction projects with delivering about 375 units total. So all of the other market rate projects across the site are going to rely on those 1,335 CAFs to meet their on-site CAF requirements. And this is important here because this is one of the reasons that the new construction application that is accompanying this amendment and the PDUP application will rely upon this change in order to meet its affordable housing requirements. So you can see in the table here, here are the all the CAFs that have been delivered with the renovations that have been reviewed so far. We also have that construction application, and then you can see in this this market rate construction application that we're reviewing right now, the units that it's going to borrow. So we still are left right now with this bank, if you will, of 888 units that other market rate projects can borrow from. We still will see 1 more renovation project and 2 more 100% affordable CAF constructions that will add to that bank once those are considered and approved by the board. And then finally, we have the biophilic pedestrian pathways. These run both north, south, and east, west through the site. The phasing plan is going to help establish which areas are going to be responsible for delivering these improvements. In some cases, renovation use permits are delivering these biophilic pathways. So we'll see a combination of those getting delivered through renovations and new construction. And then the PDUP is also going to include a set of design guidelines for these biophilic pathways, just to prescribe the lighting and benches, different planting that's expected across the site. So finally, this is the site-wide phasing plan kind of framework for the renovation areas. It's primarily going to identify where natural preserve areas, biophilic pathways are delivered across the site. And then this next slide outlines some of the phasing plan framework for the new construction areas. They're going to be responsible for delivering some of the more standard improvements, streetscape improvements along the frontage. But another item that we're introducing as part of this amendment is to allow some flexibility for those streetscape improvements to be delivered in us kind of non-standard phasing, so that we can batch some of those improvements, minimize disruption across the site, and not disrupt some of the renovation areas. And then, so some of those unique phasing details for the site are going to be the segments of the biophilic pedestrian network, those bicycle facilities and roadway improvements. That's one that we're being cognizant of batching together, and then reconfiguration of surface parking throughout the site. So now to the focus of this evening, the actual neighborhood's form-based code amendments. So again, the 2 areas of change that we're looking to make in the neighborhood's form-based code in order to allow this flexibility are changes to the affordability requirements to allow them to meet those requirements off-site, but in these designated conservation areas or base development use permit areas. And then allowing them to adjust the delivery of streetscape improvements. We're also separately working on updating the administrative regulations to allow for this new application type and some of these other necessary updates. So again, in the memo that we shared with you, there are 3 different sections of the neighborhood's form-based code that are being updated. The first is to the modification section under the administration section to introduce the phased development use permit tool. Then the part 5 sidewalk and landscape standards to allow flexibility on the delivery of timing of those. And then part 9, the building use standards for the affordable housing requirements to be met off-site. So this is our final slide. This is just a recap of the process that we've taken these amendments through. There were new fees adopted for PDUP applications in April. In May, we're finalizing this application type in the administrative regulations. And then we're working with the applicant right now for them to submit all of the items necessary for the phased development use permit application tool. We'll take this request to advertise to the board in June, and then we anticipate taking the amendments, the phased development use permit application, and the new construction application to the board in July. So happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any comments, questions?
Actually, the only one I really had was for the parking. There's the three types. There's general public parking, there's parking lots, and then there's on-street Barcroft parking. Is that gonna be like in Buckingham, that looks like a street and looks like regular parallel parking, but it's really only for the Barcroft renters who have a reserved spot or allowed to park there?
Most of the existing streets in Barcroft and those parking areas are going to remain private. There is one street, 12th Road South, that runs east-west. That is going to be eventually dedicated as a public street. And that configuration of that street is going to change significantly from head-in parking to parallel parking. And it will look and feel like a street at that point.
But would the parking along there be Barcroft parking or general public parking?
It's going to be public parking or public access easement, but I think we're working on tools to ensure that those spaces are reserved for parking residents.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'd support that. You know, I'd want to make sure that when it's dedicated, even if the county right of way ends here and then the parking starts here, that'd be fine with me, because I want to make sure that the people who are here have enough parking. And parallel parking is actually a really good way to do it rather than having a service parking lot. So, the more we could have that be where the parking is, I support that.
We see slide 15 again. It was also about parking. So I was just wondering, like, why there's a difference in the amount of parking that certain buildings or spaces get allocated versus others. So like the market rate people are gonna get 1.25, but affordable housing people get 0.825. So like, do we think they have fewer cars, or like why don't they get as much parking as they?
So right now in the form-based code, that's an incentive parking requirement for providing affordable housing. So it is an option to go down to the 0.825 spaces per unit when you do provide affordable housing.
It just really seems kind of classist when you put it on the slide like this, like rich people get more parking. Sorry, everyone.
Part of it, I think, is the leasing mechanism that the owners go through, attracting new tenants to affordable new construction projects. There was I think, an informed decision where if you're looking to, relocate those units, there's a certain parking situation that you have to be mindful of. Usually through that and working with our nonprofit partners, they've justified, I think, having lower parking ratios for those projects. It's a little bit different, and I can see why that comes up the page that way. The story is a little bit different in the garden style apartments, because historically, those have been there for 60, 70 years, however long. And a lot of folks have more than one car. A lot of folks have construction vehicles. Go down George Mason, you can see just back to back to back. So we're being mindful of not reducing their supply, but also acknowledging that through turnover, not all of them will stay in those garden style apartment units. And with the vacancies that already have been in place, new residents will be coming there. All the while, we can maintain the 1335 commitment to affordability, 99 years. And then there's the other spectrum of property owners, whether it's Gyre Lynch or others, try to market brand new, AKA luxury apartments, because the market rate will help fund all these different improvements. And those have a certain market driver, I guess, as well in terms of parking. So there's a combination of that, not just what the market calls for, but we also heard from the community in 24 about let's not have spillover parking, let's make sure the minimums are being met. But when you combine everything that this site will accommodate, there's 3-4 different parking ratios that are going to be attractive.
So the people in the affordable units will also have to choose to pay for parking separately, that the units are not linked to a spot,
That, and I'm not sure about that. It's
because,
For the caps.
so they would have to
you're
choose
describing
to rent it
less about, I guess, parking, but those that want to have, do they have to pay?
in the renovated ones. You know, right now,
Renovated, it's one.
right, but if you today renovate, or in one of those units that will be renovated, they haven't been yet. Did a parking spot come with the apartment, or do they have to pay separately for a spot in the Barcroft parking?
And dig that up, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because I know the county as a whole, any new rental can't bundle parking with the unit. It has to be separate. You have to choose to rent your spot. Even if there's plenty of spots in the building, you have to choose to rent it separately. And I think that's for all market rate buildings in the county at this point. I don't know how it works for the affordables. But you should check into that. I mean, I agree. I walked the site and it was pretty clear that a lot of the people who live there, mass transit simply isn't going to work because their jobs are not accessible by mass transit in either they're simply not, or it would take like 5 buses to get somewhere. And, you know, and if you're changing, you know, like construction guys, you know, they're in a different job every week. So they need those vehicles. So I felt once I saw it that, yeah, it's important to have enough parking for everybody there.
I think it's like, I understand the market rationale for like the people that are paying for the, you know, more expensive places are gonna get more amenities. And yet, when we looked at buildings and said like, oh, in this high rise, the affordable housing isn't as nice as the other units, or they get different amenities, like that's kind of caused like a stir, you know, culturally. So I feel like if we have a slide that's like, some people get more parking than other people, it could be an issue. Like we've talked about that as a commission when we were looking at apartment buildings and like, everybody's gonna get the same stuff, right? We're not giving lower quality stuff to the affordable housing people.
I mean, ironically, the market rate people are probably going to be more likely to take the bus into DC or Crystal City or Roslyn, right? And aren't going to need all those spaces. Whereas the people in the affordable units in this neighborhood are more likely to need them. You know, would there be, even though that new building, it's only 0.825, and that's partly the cost of construction, because presumably that it's going to be in a garage under the building. And I know that's really expensive. So I don't have a problem with that. But if people in that building could also have available to them parking on the street or parking on the street, that I'd be comfortable with.
Yeah, that was gonna be my point, because we're pooling the affordable housing for this whole site into specific buildings to allow the market to exist. So in the same way, you could pool parking into other parts of, you know, like you said, like leave the option open for street parking for individuals so that they have a spot. And that way everybody kind of has a fair shake of actually getting a parking spot on site and not having to pay and not having to go off site. Maybe not limiting, you know, sharing garage space, some of the new constructions, maybe market rate buildings, something along those lines.
Since this is form-based code, can we actually like tell the applicant, like do it differently or?
I mean, I think what you're gonna experience is some pushback in that. First of all, I'll go backwards. Good point. New development when it comes online, you're gonna see northwest and northeast corners of that property reconfigured, smaller street grid, new development paths. They will deliver new street segments with on-street parking. So again, everybody has access to some on-street parking.
Right, but I'd like to have that on-street parking be Barcroft parking rather than general public. I think that's part of
Yeah.
the point. Have identified that, yeah, you don't have to go 5 blocks into the neighborhood to park your truck or your car. That there is something within the defined Barcroft site that would have parking available. Like even the Transportation Commission was, you know, hearing me arguing for more parking is something you rarely hear. And even Transportation Commission, with business before them, was also, yeah, you gotta have parking here for these people.
And I think the balance we're trying to strike is through the phase development use permit that you two crediting and acknowledging that any kind of internal street to that large 60-acre property will have that priority for the residents, but also then balancing that with, let's say, the perimeter street like George Mason, where a lot of folks might be parking to access the park across the street, 4-mile run to get to the trail, right?
No, I'm not talking about George Mason, because I agree, that's,
So I think we're on the same page in terms of.
yeah, I'm talking internal,
Yep.
any new streets that are internal to the site, not the perimeter streets, because I agree, they read public, everyone expects it to be public, and there's other uses that has to serve, absolutely, but it's internal to Barcroft.
Okay, so are there more internal streets than what we see here?
Mr. Chair. Just a point of help for the conversation. I know you and your commissioners are really benefiting from the deep dive on Barcroft, and this is such an effective forum for that. At the same time, I would request that we make sure that the feedback to staff is really making sure that we're making everything we need to into the phase development use permit tool process mechanism, so that the needs that you're identifying can be, honored and reflected in that regard. So I hope my hope is that
Okay, so
to not lose sight of
so
that.
the things we're talking about could be within this new use permit entity,
Mhm.
that when it comes up, we can then start advocating, pushing for that sort of thing, using that tool. Is that we're looking at?
It's helping memorialize what you see on the screen are just parking minimums, right? As each project comes in, they can to a degree exceed them. We do have maximums in some places because we don't want to overbuild parking. But I think minimums are essentially expected at this point to be committed to by the community, especially surrounding civic associations, to make sure that that site is self-contained, that we're not
I've never
creating-
seen a civic association that argued for less parking, so, I'm pretty comfortable with that, that the augur is going to be doing that. But yeah, I just wanted to spotlight that, make sure that this doesn't end up being ignored as an issue.
If I may, it seems like a lot of Commissioner Peterson's concerns about the supply of parking, whether it's on street, off street for the CAFs. It's our understanding that the PDUP will be setting this neighborhood scale expectation based on what's in the MFDP, but for what it's worth, I feel a lot of the questions would be very appropriate to ask of the applicant when it comes time for a PDUP review, when it's right for the commission. And forgive me for speaking out of turn. I'm assuming that the PDUP ultimately will come to the planning commission.
That's exactly my
for some sort of-
question. Where,
Yeah.
who sees this, who passes on it, other than the aug?
Yes, you will see the PDUP application and the new construction application. And that'll come to you in July, along with these form-based code amendments.
Will
Yeah,
that
it's-
be aug and then directly to planning commission, or is there going to be like an SPRC process?
Just OG and planning commission.
That's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, because this meeting here just creates the guardrails and puts it in the form-based code that we are allowed to do this. And then I think the discussion is relevant. These conversations will inform ultimately goes into the. But yeah, this what we're dealing with just right now is just making the lane for this permit process to exist.
I will just to finer point on the ratios. You're highlighting an issue that I think is a countywide issue / question. I'll put on my personal perspective on this, and that is the cost of achieving a mixed income property. I don't think we can get it to a place where everybody has the same ratio. I think what helps me sleep at night is that every unit, when this is done, will be renovated or delivered as brand new. So I think there is an element of equity in terms of the residents, both existing and future, that they can benefit from, in addition to the public spaces and the other improvements that Olivia was mentioning. This PDUP will help track. So I think there is a level of fairness, but I think a lot of market realities where we're dealing with market rate units versus affordable ones. What does that mean for the financing of those projects and the rents that can generate? So
But I think asking if there was extra parking in the market rate building, it
Would
would
that be
behoove the CAFs to let them rent from that building.
Would they
So
rent it out to somebody else?
maybe we can ask the applicant that when it comes to planning
Yeah.
commission, like, if you have extra spots in the new fancy building, will you let the affordable housing people rent them out?
Right.
Because we've had that recently for planning commission. The SPRC is that a new building is going up with excess parking right off the bat. And they're saying, yeah, we'll rent anybody who wants. We're gonna
Yeah.
share it with another development that comes up, or we could rent it out to somebody else. They don't want to have an empty space that they're not generating income on.
But
And
is
that
that the
had to
one that
be-
had a garage there already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was on
33.
It's two of them.
So the proposition here is that every building, every garage will be brand new.
Right.
I think just what we're seeing already with market conditions and like very few projects being able to move forward, the reality of anybody oversupplying, even if it just feels good, it helps, it's very low. But that project was unique in that.
Right, I know.
The previous garage.
Right. I understand that, but I know that they tended to be overestimating what they need, because I've pretty much heard up and down the corridor, the RB corridor, that they're underparked. All those new garages, they're just not filled. Mark, what was, it's now the crossing, they were renting out one of their levels to one of the car dealers to store new cars, because it was never used. It was up and down the corridor, they pretty much tend to overpark. One of the new developments, not the Beacon, the one next to it, where it used to be the Red Top, one of those buildings, they came in after site plan was approved to eliminate one level of the garage.
My question is that it had to be part of the site plan conditions in order to allow the applicant to rent out their extra parking spots to other people. So if something similar needs to be done
Right.
in this situation where
We want
the affordable
flexibility.
housing people are allowed to park in or rent spots from the market rate building, if that wouldn't otherwise be allowed unless we explicitly say it, let's explicitly say
In
that.
the event that this
Mhm.
fancy building's overparked, and then it would be possible for other people who live on the bar property could
If they,
Park
yeah,
there.
and again,
in the event.
give the owner the option to
Yeah.
do that.
But to Nick's point, we're probably getting too far into the weeds.
Right.
So,
We can take a look. Yeah.
and then I was also wondering the traditional phasing, the guardrails that we would usually require someone to lay out in like a site plan, we're not doing that here, and I didn't think I understood why. When there was like a slide earlier on of like, here's what we're doing today, and here's what we're not doing today, and traditional phasing was in the not, and I didn't know why.
So I think part of the challenge here is site is so large and there's so many redevelopment paths that the applicant doesn't know at this point what's going to go first. I think we have an idea of maybe the first couple, but beyond that, such a large site, we have no idea how many years this might take to actually realize everything. So instead of trying to guess and then having to keep going back and revisit, what we're doing is just identifying what kind of improvements are going to be, each development path is going to be responsible for. And we may see a couple different scenarios depending on, if X site goes first, they're responsible for delivering, a portion of 12th Road versus another site. But that was the logic there.
And it couldn't be the case that they only do the market rate stuff and leave the affordable stuff for like absolute last. And then there's like a problem with the economy. And then Oh, sorry, we couldn't get to it. The financing didn't work out, like that couldn't happen. Or it could.
Well, it can't, but I think that's partly because of the agreements they've made with, the financing agreements. We will see all of the renovations. That is going to be the first thing that gets delivered. On the heels of that, we're going to see the three, 100% affordable projects get delivered. So that's going to be the first push that we'll see. But to that point, I think most of this, the more significant site improvements that we're going to see are going to be tied to market rate development.
And the 100 years affordable housing commitment, that 100 years starts ticking when they get their certificate of occupancy, or they could wait 30 years to build stuff. And then actually we only got 70 years of affordable housing
I
out of
think
it.
it actually started in December of 2021, I believe. That was that's when the units were actually committed. With each of these use permits, we're memorializing and adding, specific condition language for how each of those CAFs is to be treated. But in December of 2021, they were already committed, their clocks started.
But that's also because the existing, still unrenovated, have been converted to formal caps, right?
Right. Yeah, their rents have been capped and
But there is a number, a certain percent that aren't built yet, but that 100 years is already ticking down.
well, the 1335 exists today. There will probably be points in time where they are underneath that threshold, but with the first new construction of 100% affordable project being delivered, that's going to
That
more than
includes what I think
replace.
what you're asking. New construction, first one, say gets delivered 2025, 2028. Is that a 99-year clock from that point on? They're opening, and they get their COs. By that point, since it's 2028, it's 93 years,
So until J.R. Lynch took over, these are marks, is that right? So right off the bat, we had a big improvement by locking them in as caps.
But I just want, what percentage is that? Like how many affordable units are we delivering here? Across the whole
1335.
At the end of the day, they're maintaining that 1335.
So the number is staying, but they might be shifting between. So it's tied to like a particular unit rather than physical building.
Okay.
So the beginning and the end will be the same. So, but there might be periods where some are not being occupied because buildings are being constructed
Renovated
or
or
renovated.
constructed.
Yeah. So we might go under that for a little bit, but it'll like 1335.
However complicated it sounds, it's 5 times. Learned all right.
I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I need to hear this presentation 4 more
I know,
times
this-
before I think
This is
I
the best
understand
I've seen
it.
it in 3D.
I know. Getting a better understanding of Barcroft here. Any other questions,
No,
comments, concerns?
I mean, I think it's a good idea and.
Yeah.
I don't have any further.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
explaining it to
Thank you,
us
Bob.
in 3 different
I have
ways.
to explain it again when it comes coming in.
I'm assuming we don't have any public comments or anything.
No request in the chat for additional public
Didn't
comment or
even-
anything like that, so I think,
That's my new rule.
yeah.
That's a shame.
So, Mr. Chair, sounds like we're at adjournment.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank everybody.
Nick wants to know if he can stop recording.
Thank everybody for coming out, and if you're watching this later, thank you for watching all the way to the end. And otherwise, we're adjourned, and wish you all good night.
Great, thank you so much.
Say it.